In January 1964, a 17-year-old high school student in San Diego decided to stop sleeping, not for a night, not for a weekend. He wanted to break the world record for the longest a human being had ever stayed awake. The existing record was 260 hours, just under 11 days. His name was Randy Gardner, and what happened to his body and mind across those 11 days is one of the most detailed first-person accounts of sleep deprivation ever documented. Because a researcher from Stanford University named William Dement heard about it and showed up at Randy's house with recording equipment. He wasn't going to let this go to waste. On day one, nothing happened. Randy was 17 and healthy, and staying awake for one night was nothing. He felt fine. He watched television. He laughed with his friends. He was, by all accounts, completely normal. Day two was when the first thing appeared. Randy's vision began to blur, not dramatically, just a softening at the edges. Reading became harder. He had to hold things closer. His eyes, deprived of the repair cycle that normally runs during sleep, had begun their first small protest. By day three, Randy's mood had changed. He became irritable without warning, sharp, then apologetic, then sharp again. His ability to regulate emotion was degrading. The prefrontal cortex, which handles impulse control and emotional moderation, requires sleep to function. It had already begun to drift offline. Day four is when things became genuinely strange. Randy looked at a street sign and saw a person standing beside it. There was no person. He turned to point them out to his friends. By the time he turned back, the figure was gone. He stood there for a moment, uncertain. This was not a dream. He was awake. The figure had been completely real to him, and it had not existed at all. The hallucinations at this stage weren't like dreaming. They weren't scenes or narratives. They were intrusions. Brief, vivid, inserted into waking reality without warning and gone just as fast. His brain, denied the REM sleep during which it normally processes visual information, had begun generating its own. Day 5. Randy tried to complete a simple mental task, counting backward from 100 by sevens. He stopped at 65, not because he was tired, because he had forgotten what he was doing, mid-sentence, mid-task. The thread simply wasn't there. His short-term memory was failing. The hippocampus consolidates memories during sleep, transferring information from short-term to long-term storage. Without sleep, nothing was being saved. Events that happened an hour earlier were inaccessible. Randy existed increasingly in a present that had no recorded past. Day 6. His speech had slowed, words arrived late, sentences sometimes didn't complete. Dement noted that Randy would begin a thought, trail off, and show no awareness that he had stopped. He was not choosing to stop. He simply lost the thread and didn't know it was gone. Day 7. Randy began experiencing something researchers call microsleeps. Involuntary lapses of consciousness lasting between 1 and 30 seconds. He was awake. Then, for a moment, he wasn't. Then, he was again. He had no awareness of the gaps. His brain, unable to stay fully awake, was stealing sleep in fragments too small to notice. This is the point at which the line between sleeping and waking begins to dissolve. Day 8. Randy's coordination had deteriorated. He couldn't catch a ball reliably. His fine motor control was gone. He moved carefully, deliberately, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. His face had taken on a flatness. The emotional expressiveness had faded. He looked like someone watching his own life from behind glass. Day 9. Dement conducted a systematic cognitive test. Randy could not remember the names of common objects when shown pictures of them. A chair, a fork, a clock. He would look at the image, know that he knew the word, and be unable to produce it. The knowledge was there. The access had broken. Day 10. Randy's paranoia had deepened. He became convinced, briefly, that Dement was trying to make him fail, that the tests were designed to embarrass him. This wasn't characteristic. This was the deprived brain finding threats where none existed, the threat detection system running hot and uncalibrated. Day 11. The final morning. Randy Gardner had been awake for 264 hours and 25 minutes. He was conscious. He was functional in the loosest sense of the word. He could answer questions. He could hold a press conference, which he did, speaking clearly, demonstrating remarkable resilience. Then he slept for 14 hours and 40 minutes. And when he woke up, almost everything had returned to normal. Almost. Researchers monitoring his recovery found something unexpected. Randy's brain didn't simply sleep for a long time and recover uniformly. It prioritized. On the first night, his brain spent an unusually high proportion of time in slow-wave sleep, the deep, physically restorative phase. The second night, the proportion of REM sleep surged, the phase associated with emotional processing, memory consolidation, and cognitive repair. The brain had a repair list, and it was working through it in order. This tells us something important. Sleep is not one thing. It is a structured sequence of different processes, each doing something specific, each required. When you cut sleep short, not by 11 days, but by 1 or 2 hours, night after night, you don't lose sleep uniformly. You tend to lose the later stages first, because the early stages run on a fixed schedule and the later stages get cut off when the alarm sounds, and the later stages are disproportionately responsible for the things we most need: emotional regulation, memory consolidation, creative processing, the repair of the prefrontal cortex that keeps impulsivity in check, the chronic sleep deprivation of modern life, the 6 hours instead of 8, the late nights and early alarms. Doesn't look like Randy Gardner. It doesn't produce hallucinations or memory blackouts. It just produces a version of you that is slightly more irritable than necessary, slightly less creative than you could be, slightly worse at regulating emotion, retaining information, seeing situations clearly. So gradually, you don't notice. So consistently, you assume it's just who you are. In 2003, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania ran a study on chronic mild sleep restriction. They took participants and restricted them to 6 hours of sleep per night for 2 weeks. They measured cognitive performance daily. The results were striking. After 14 days of 6-hour sleep, participants performed as badly on cognitive tests as subjects who had been kept awake for 24 hours straight. A full, sleepless day. But here is the part that should stay with you. When the researchers asked the participants how they felt, how impaired they believed themselves to be, the answer was, fine, slightly tired maybe, nothing serious. Their subjective experience of their own impairment had flatlined. They had adapted to the sensation of being impaired. They had lost the ability to accurately assess how diminished they were. They felt okay. They were not okay, and they had no way of knowing the difference. Randy Gardner knew exactly how impaired he was. He could feel it. He experienced every stage of the degradation as it happened. The rest of us experience it so gradually, so incrementally, across so many years, that the degraded state becomes the baseline. We stop remembering what fully rested felt like. We assume the fog is normal. We assume the irritability is just stress. We assume the difficulty concentrating is just the way things are. 11 days without sleep is a spectacle. It makes headlines. It ends with a press conference and a world record. 6 hours a night for a decade is invisible. It ends with nothing. It just quietly changes what you're capable of being, and you never even know it's happening.